Hello, I'm Jordan Kurtz, and this is my YouTube channel, Jordan Kurtz Hypnosis. A couple of changes I've been working on recently to the updates. You can see I got the lamp in the background, and I've been working on my audio quality as well. I'm going to make sure that I can hear myself in the stream. Yeah, all good. All right. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, cool. So today I'm going to be talking about a interview between Dr. Andrew Huberman and Dr. Ethan Kross. And reference, Ethan Kross runs a inner voice laboratory. Can't remember what university is. But they're basically going to discuss, it's about a 3-hour long podcast. Not going to watch the whole thing. But overall, it's going to be about basically what he does, anxiety, trauma, how that relates to your inner voice and resilience. And I thought this topic was appropriate because on this channel, I've used the term subconscious speak before. And that's kind of similar. The term sounds familiar to that term inner voice. And they're slightly different. He's using that in a slightly different context. He's using inner voice sort of like the way you talk to yourself. But I think the way you talk to yourself is a very good indicator of how healthy your subconscious beliefs are. And I find that when I'm interacting with other people, I can't help but pick up on the way they describe themselves. Do they like themselves? Do they not like themselves? And he's going to go into some cognitive approaches to address this issue. And I'm going to break down how effective I think those are and perhaps a better alternative to addressing that inner voice. Spoiler alert, reducing the need for your inner voice to self-criticize and basically, most people's inner voices tend to they tend to be very negative inherently, and typically most kinds of advice, including the stuff from Ethan Kross, are going to be particularly cognitive, things you can do, exercise, things to avoid that negativity. And I look at it from a different approach. My approach is, can we address the source of the negativity and remove it altogether? And I think that, so that's what the topic of the show is today. Thanks for joining. Let's get into it. All right. I think I have to unmute the desktop audio, don't I?
I'm doing.
I'm going to turn this a little bit down. Watching my levels here.
And I don't really think about it any fix.
Okay. I'm going to go up a little back. All right. That's the level I like it to be at.
That up. And then I just get on the device. It's usually an aerobic exercise that I'm doing. And I don't really think about it in any fixed way, but inevitably the ideas, the potential solutions bubble up into awareness. That is a real valuable tool that I possess that I think allows me to have success in various areas of my life. It also identifies one of the reasons why chatter can be so unbelievably pernicious. So we didn't get to all the benefits of there's one more benefit of the inner voice.
So that's what he's calling just for reference, is that term chatter. So he's kind of using the term chatter as, I think, a little bit synonymous with the inner voice, but also to be more specific of this kind of overwhelming kind of sense of like a worry or dread or anxiety that inner voice usually takes the form of.
That I want to get to, but I'm going to take a detour here for a second because I think this is really important. If we think of chatter as the dark side of your inner voice, you're basically continuing to loop over the same problem in your head without making any progress. What if this happens? Why did this happen? I'm such a imbecile. You're just continually going over that negative phenomenon or experience. You're not making any headway. One of the things that does is it consumes our attentional resources. It acts like a sponge that soaks up those limited resources. And so what that means is when I get on the treadmill or rowing machine, and that's typically the time that I spend innovating, right? Coming up with solutions that allow me to progress personally and professionally. My mind's not working to solve those problems. Instead, it is stuck dealing with this other muck where I'm not getting anywhere. And so we actually see, if you look at the literature, that one of the ways that chatter undermines people is it interferes with their ability to focus and solve problems. And that's just one way it undermines people, but that is a huge, huge liability.
Is there an association?
So what he's talking about there is he was discussing exercising, about how the body likes to use exercise to sort of be creative and come up with things and analyze solutions. And he's talking about how people that have particularly negative inner voice and inner chatter, they tend to use that time instead to just almost amplify those negative thoughts of, like he was describing, like, should I have done this? The examples he gave, let's go back a little bit. I want to make sure I get this right.
And I was overwhelmed with problems and
the big kind. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions to addressing many of the big kinds of problems and decisions we have to face. So there are different modalities. Also do its thing. We don't understand. Is not infrequent. Many people report having moments of insight. One line of thinking is that, and the solutions are bubbling up to awareness. So I actually, this may be the wrong usage of terms, but I weaponize this process for row or do that. Silence bubble up into awareness. That is a real valuable tool that I possess that I think allows me to have success in various areas of my life. It also identifies one of the reasons why chatter can be so unbelievably pernicious. So we didn't get to all the benefits of there's one more benefit of the inner voice that I want to get to, but I'm going to take a detour here for a second because I think this is really important. If we think of chatter as the dark side of your inner voice, you're basically continuing to loop over the same problem in your head without making any progress. What if this happened?
Okay, so that's the first important part he said, was continuing to loop over the same problem in your head without progress. Another term for that is rumination.
Why did this happen? I'm such a...
Okay, and these are the examples that are important.
Problem in your head without making any progress. What if this happens? Why did this happen? I'm such a...
Okay. What if this happens? Why did this happen? I'm such an imbecile, i.e., I'm not good enough.
You're just continually...
And so what he's describing is basically rumination. People will ruminate on their negative beliefs and their negative feelings constantly. And he's describing that exercise typically, which might be used in a more productive manner for the brain, is instead harbored by these negative feelings. And of course, my approach to rumination is always, well, why are you ruminating? What are you ruminating about? And do you notice patterns in what you're ruminating about? And so if someone were to come to me and ask, well, I'm always worried about what other people are thinking of me, or I'll go solo. Let's do that. So, like, I'm always worried what people are thinking about me, or I don't want to progress because I don't want to, or make any progress in my life because I'm worried what others might think if I go, if I try and succeed, they might judge me. And so it's much easier to remove the root causes of this rumination rather than to simply, to use cognitive techniques, because if you keep having to use cognitive techniques to override this stuff, then it requires constant energy. You always have to do it. It's much easier, or it's much more convenient for the individual to simply say, you know what, I'm going to just remove the root causes, whatever those might be in my subconscious, and just stop the rumination altogether.
Really going over that negative.
We'll zoom in. I'll skip ahead a couple seconds here.
I would say even more than an association. So,
Okay, bear with me here.
so what that means is when I get on the treadmill or rowing machine, and that's typically the time that I spend innovating, right? Coming up with solutions that allow me to progress personally and professionally. My mind's not working to solve those problems. Instead, it is stuck dealing with this other muck where I'm not getting anywhere. And so we actually see, if you look at the literature, that one of the ways that chatter undermines people is
and you're not getting anywhere because rumination typically feels good in a certain way, especially if you're ruminating about things that you once didn't have power over. And so if you were in an environment that you particularly couldn't get your way very often, or were particularly restricted, or you weren't allowed to feel certain things, or if you did feel certain things, you were ashamed of it, then rumination is kind of like taking your power back in a way. It's like I can control my own. I can almost replay the events in my head about what I should have done or what I should have said, and it gives you a sense of strength. And actually, in hypnosis, what we can do is there are techniques I use in hypnosis which allow you to basically go back in time, metaphorically speaking, but the subconscious really has no concept of time, and we can allow you to experience and take back that power which wasn't there before, and hence you don't need to ruminate about it anymore, because there's nothing to ruminate about. That problem that your brain has been ruminating over has been resolved, and there's no need to do that because it's over. It's complete. You've gone back and saved yourself, essentially.
it interferes with their ability to focus and solve problems. And that's just one way it undermines people, but that is a huge, huge liability.
Is there an association between trauma and elevated levels of internal chatter?
I would say even more than an association. So we often think of chatter as what we call it as a transdiagnostic mechanism. So it's a mouthful that predicts various kinds of mood disorders. So what that means is chatter refers to a process of looping, turning the same material over and over in your head. The content of that looping can take many different forms. You could inject some sad cognitions in there. I'm a shit, such a shit. Is it okay to say shit?
See, I don't think that. See, he's describing it as he's describing the chatter as more of a cognitive process more than a subconscious process. And so he uses that word, you can inject negativity, but I don't think that's how that works. I don't think you inject anything. I think it's your subconscious trying to address a problem that it already has, which, if it's a problem, it's already inherently negative. So this idea that you inject it in, I don't think that's very much of a choice. I mean, you might choose the words to describe the negative feeling you have, and those words might be the thing that's rolling around in your head, but the feeling itself isn't really what's being injected. It's the description of that feeling. So it's like, why are you injecting a word or a phrase? I'm such an imbecile. I am shit. I'm not good enough. Whatever it is, why are you injecting that into that chatter to begin with? Well, typically it's because it's something you're already feeling. And so, again, if you don't feel that negative feeling to begin with, there's none of this injecting negative thoughts. Now, I think that there can be a two-pronged approach where if you've never been taught how to be nice to yourself, if you've never been taught the language that you can use to describe and be kind to yourself, I think there's something to learn there. But that'll only take you so far. If you try and inject into your thoughts, I am good enough, I am worthy, I am strong, I am powerful, whatever you want. If your subconscious doesn't actually believe those things, then it doesn't matter how many times you say it, because you feel like you're lying to yourself. And so, but the inverse is the case. If you fix your subconscious, if you remove those negative programs, and you subsequently have that positive self-talk, I am good enough, I am a champion, I'm the greatest, I am successful. When you use that language, then you are reinforcing and amplifying the good beliefs that are already inside of you. And that is where I think most people would like to be. I think it doesn't, because life is hard to begin with. And so life is going to have struggles and difficulties for everything. And so the thought that you'll never have negative self-talk, no matter how clean you make yourself, is just wrong. But, if I hit someone with my car or something, I'm probably going to be a little frustrated with myself, understandably. But if I do it, but there's a difference between that, but you're taking, the difference between that is you're taking an external event and you're upset about the event, which, if I hit someone, perhaps I feel a little bit ashamed, guilty, and I want to make things right. But those are natural emotions to feel. But if you just feel ashamed and guilty and you've done nothing wrong, you just feel it for, I don't want to say no reason, but you just feel it when you don't think you probably should be feeling it. And not meaning that feeling's not justified, but meaning, if you accomplish something and you still feel it, you feel crummy. Or you don't want to accomplish something because you're worried about the shame coming from other people. See, those are signs of subconscious issues that start to trickle into that chatter in your head. So if you listen to your own chatter in your head, what's going through your head? I mean, I'm a very busy guy. I do a lot of stuff, and I often find that, and he'll talk about this technique, but the technique of stepping back and watching the chatter is sometimes useful. Now, I think that oftentimes when people get that advice, it is useful advice, but it's useful to understand and explain what's going on, but it doesn't always change it. and that's basically what I'm describing as meditation, is that idea of it's the idea of observation over engagement. Sometimes it is helpful to take a step back and look at yourself from like a third person perspective and look at what's going on in your life, and so that you can kind of analyze it. That is helpful. But I think that's only step one. And the next step should typically be, if you take that step back, you're observing your thoughts rather than engaging them, and you notice the patterns in your thoughts, that's an indicator that you probably have some subconscious issues going on. And so you can use this chatter to your benefit if you have the right tools. And so that's part of the reason my channel exists, is to encourage people to look at that chatter and to use it as a tool, use it for you rather than against you, even if it's negative, and say, I can do something about this. I feel empowered to do something about my negative chatter to significantly reduce it, if not eliminate it altogether. At least eliminate the subconscious triggers for that chatter. All right, let's keep going.
Should I say that?
Sure. David Goggins was on this podcast.
Okay, so
yeah, and, pretty much anything goes. Typically, we don't swear at each other, but
okay. I should hope
I'm
not.
pretty thick-skinned. If you need to, I've been called way worse than anything
you've been boxing. I actually boxed in high school.
I don't recommend people box unless they're they're professional, and even then, I must say, as a neuroscientist,
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and on Wednesday nights I'd spar a little bit, but I will say this: it's there are other sports where you can go level 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
More safely, much more safely for the brain, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and things like that. You
typically don't want to insult the brain.
Yeah, I as a neuroscientist, I can't encourage people to box.
I would agree. In any case, I promise not to leap across the table if you do the same.
Fair enough.
Deal?
Fair deal.
So basically, chatter refers to this process of looping over and over. If you inject some sad cognitions in there, I'm an imbecile. How can I? I'm never going to live up to my potential. I don't belong here. So then you get, if you take that to an extreme, high intensity, and you perseverate over time, then you're getting towards depression. If you inject
towards depression, it's like, okay, but is it really towards depression, or is he's describing, I think he has the cause and effect slightly reversed, where it's not that you injecting that constantly causes depression. Typically it's the depression is likely caused by some combination of perhaps just one or perhaps several different subconscious negative maladaptive subconscious programs that you have, and that those are just looping over and over and over again. So it's like that the looping of the negative thoughts, I think it's like it doesn't lead to depression, it is the depression. But why do you have the depression to begin with? It's not because you're looping thoughts. It's the need to loop those thoughts which is the source of the depression. And it's the subconscious which causes the depression, and the subconscious, as a result, causes you to loop those thoughts, which then gives you the experience of depression. So it's not, I think that it's not like these negative thoughts come out of nowhere. That's what I don't I don't really like, that's why I don't really like the model he's describing. These negative thoughts don't typically come out of nowhere. And the need to loop them over and over and over again, that is also variable. It's not, most people don't like feeling negative. And so unless there's a good reason, like we were talking about rumination earlier, to loop these thoughts, negative thoughts themselves aren't going to manifest. It's not like, it's not going to inherently create a positive feedback loop. Requires, well, feedback. It requires you put something into a system, and that thing allows for more things to be put in the system, allows for more things, and it grows exponentially. And that's kind of what happens if you have a subconscious mind that amplifies that. But if your subconscious mind is healthy, it doesn't require those. It doesn't. A healthy subconscious mind doesn't amplify those negative feedbacks. There's no need to. It'll go in, but it's like a negative feedback loop. It's like, well, it's not like a negative feedback loop. It's just a dampener, because negative things are going to happen. And if your subconscious mind is unhealthy, i.e., you're depressed, perhaps that sends you into a spiral of depression. But if your subconscious mind is healthy, negative things come in and just kind of dissipates. You just kind of feel neutral. You might be upset for, depending on the thing, you might be upset for a certain period of time, but eventually you get over it and you keep going. And I think that's where most people want to be, is they want to have negative things might enter their life, but eventually they return back to baseline. But if you find yourself not going to baseline, that it seems like the more negative events happen to you, it is this positive feedback loop into depression, then come work with me, and we can help address the root causes of that, which is the subconscious mind, ultimately.
Anxiety-provoking cognitions. Oh my God, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And you go down that path of uncertainty and fear. Well, that leads you to more of the anxious route. And if you are filling that loop with traumatic memories and reminders of really painful experiences, you can get pushed towards trauma too. So it is a process that cuts across many different, really serious conditions that we grapple with in society. But I want to also be clear to folks who are listening that if you experience chatter, that does not mean you have any of those disorders. If you experience chatter, welcome to the human condition, my friends, because most of us do at times. And so we often don't experience it as intensely or for long stretches of time, which tends to characterize some of those clinical groups.
I'd like to take a quick break and
I'll move ahead in his podcast here, but that's kind of the point, is that just because you have chatter doesn't mean you have depression. Yes, that's true, but again, it's like, well, what happens when do those negative thoughts and external events cause you to spiral into that, or do you just kind of are you able to go back to baseline, which is healthy? And you also might find that some things set you off and some other things don't. And again, but whatever sets you off, if you find that there are certain things and events that set you off and cause you to feel all this anxiety and worry and depression and sadness and all these things, then come work with me and we can address those root causes so that doesn't happen anymore.
if you had to highlight for now, and we'll get back to others in a moment, the best maybe one or two ways to combat chatter, what would those be?
Well, that's let me tell you about a couple of things that I do personally, because like as we try to regulate lots of different emotional experiences. Different tools work for different people in different situations. There are, upwards of 24 or more science-based tools that I covered when I wrote Chatter, when I got into Shift, the broader terrain of regulating your emotions. There are even more tools out there. So,
real quick, I'm just going to check my audio here because I want to know how I'm doing.
Space tools that I
and so you can use this Chatter to your benefit if you have the right tools. And so that's part of the reason my channel exists. Okay, I'm a little low here. I need to figure out how to testing. Okay. Real quick. All right, I'm gonna unmute myself. Let's see if this works any better. I do want to hear myself here. Oh boy. I do want to hear myself here. Oh boy. I feel empowered. Okay, well, let's try this again. Oh boy. Yeah, I want to hear a few things. I feel empowered. That's strange. Okay, let's just keep going. I think it'll be fine. My levels look okay. I'll have to troubleshoot. I thought I tried troubleshooting it before, but well. It'll still getting the kinks worked out, but it's all good. Okay. Now you can hear me a little bit better. Let's play this video again.
So I don't want to presume that the tools that work for me are going to work for everyone. My first line of defense when it comes to Chatter are two distancing tools. So when I'm using the term distancing, what I'm talking about is not avoidance per se. We should talk about avoidance later. But what I'm talking about when I say distancing is the ability to step back and view myself from a slightly more objective perspective. And it turns out there are many different tactics that exist for doing this. One tactic that I find very powerful is language. So I can manipulate the words I use to refer to myself. So I will often use my name and the second person pronoun you to try to think through a problem. Ethan, how are you going to manage this situation? If you think about when we use words like you, they are the verbal equivalent of pointing a finger at someone else. And when you use your name and you to work through a problem, it's automatically switching your perspective. It's getting you to relate to yourself like you're giving advice to someone else. And it turns out that's a really powerful tool, because one of the things we know about human beings is we are much better at giving advice to others than we are taking that advice ourselves. Have you ever experienced this, Andrew?
Gosh, no. Yes, of course. Absolutely.
So he's basically describing a cognitive tool to address this problem. And so he's actually what I was describing earlier, which that observation over engagement tool, which you step back, you view yourself from third person. You're like, what would Jordan do? What is Jordan thinking about right now? He's thinking about how he spent all that time trying to troubleshoot his mic, and the stupid thing is still low, and he had to turn off some stupid filters. That's what I'm thinking about. But but that, again, that's a cognitive tool, and that's a useful cognitive tool to kind of organize your thoughts. But again, if the root cause of that, like, you have to, if you've got a leak in a ship, it is helpful to step back and figure out where the leak is, but you still have to plug the leak at the end of the day. Like, it is important to do both. So, and in this case, if the leak is that subconscious program that's negative, that's injecting all these negative thoughts into your self-chatter, then you have to plug that hole. You can't just identify it. You have to plug the hole. So we'll keep going.
I mean, our optics are just much clearer when we're in observation than when we're internally, unless I find that I dedicate some real minutes or hours, basically a sort of meditation, not unlike the complete sentence construction exploration that we were talking about before, of just going inward and really saying, okay, let's have a conversation about this, Andrew, and having a conversation with myself in there. And that always leads to an obvious truth.
Yeah.
Or sometimes a decision node that isn't clear to me yet, but it leads someplace that feels like forward.
Yeah. But you're taking special steps to be able to align yourself with the advice that you would give to someone else. Like, reflexively, sometimes we stumble, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the number of different ways that we can distract ourselves. This is what I was going to ask in a few moments, but I'll take the opportunity now. I am wondering, as we're talking about this today, if one of the more powerful hooks of social media is the scroll aspect, that with essentially zero effort, we can pick up a device and scroll through images and movies, and it will update us update the imagery and topics, of course, according to what it senses as our dwell times on certain pages. And all of a sudden, we don't have to think about what's in our head.
Yeah.
My dad used to refer to surfing the internet, because at that time it was that, and scrolling social media as kind of a cognitive chewing gum.
Yeah.
It keeps us busy, but it doesn't provide any real nutrition.
Well, it's interesting. If you go back to...
and it's often just used as a distraction from that negative chatter in your head. So if you can just endlessly scroll, it kind of numbs your experience, and you don't have to think about that. That's why social media, like, I'll go full screen for this. So it's like, the question is, is social media addictive, or is it just being used on people with addictive personalities? Or not addictive personalities. Is it just another addiction like anything else? Like alcohol, porn, weed, video games, any behavior that can be used to try and mask negative feelings can be inherently addictive. The addiction comes from the desire to not want to feel something negative. And if you have a nice steady stream of content coming in, we've all scrolled through, TikTok or YouTube or Shorts, or Instagram Shorts, wherever we get that, the doom scrolling. And, and not everyone I don't think everyone who is on their phones is addicted to them. But I think that it's two things. One is that It really depends on why you're using them. I think they're designed to be addictive because they're sort of intermittent. They're designed for that intermittent rewards. But the fact that they are rewarding you at all is also can be used to numb or hide or make you temporarily forget about your problems and your going through your subconscious mind. And so that's kind of where I look at that and I go, okay, like, we know that they're designed to be addictive. I think the first example I remember of that was, a notification. That little, it's usually red for some reason, that little red one, in Facebook. I think Facebook was my first social media platform way back in, was that middle school or something? And that red one new message is just so, it's inherently, it pushes on those reward feedback systems. But again, does that mean you're addicted to them? Perhaps I think addiction should be measured on a scale of how addictive something is to a particular individual. Because I might not be the type of person, for example, to get addicted to weed, but I might be addicted to alcohol or porn or, whatever my vice is. I have to pick, or social media or video games or whatever it is. I have to pick a vice that actually fits my reward pathways. And a lot of people have similar reward pathways. That's why people are addicted to similar things. But I think that you have to kind of wonder, our social media, like, when you're, okay, so here's my thought on this, is like, how do you measure how addictive social media is? You have to have, I think the only real way to measure it is base it off of people who already have healthy subconscious minds. But how do you measure that? See, that's a more interesting puzzle. Because if you're just, if you ask an alcoholic how addictive alcohol is, it's like they're going to, of course, like, your data is all going to be skewed towards alcoholics. So, of course, you're going to find that, alcohol is addictive. But I wonder if the individuals they're measuring, maybe this is another show idea, is on addiction, is like, how do you measure addiction? You can measure the reward pathways, but just because it triggers those reward pathways doesn't mean you always get addicted to it as much as somebody else. I mean, we all know individuals who seem to always be on their phone, and I have friends that have actively told me, like, I hate my phone. I hate my iPhone. It's like they don't like using it as a communication style. They find they don't like that stuff. For those kinds of people, is social media still addictive? Will that still, those feedback loops still work on those individuals, or were they not? And either way, I'm getting a little philosophical here, but the point is, what's in it for you? So, whatever your addictions might be, why are you addicted? What negative feelings are you trying to cover up by doing something else? I don't care if it's scrolling through social media. I don't care if it's, name any activity. If you're using any activity to specifically numb or hide the feelings you get from bad or maladaptive subconscious programs, then that is a clue into what those subconscious programs are. And if you work with me, we can completely eliminate those. All right.
When Facebook first came on the scene, one of the early prompts that it would use to get people to contribute textual information to, do you remember what this was? What is on your mind? Oh, no. So you would be cued to share what is on your mind. And, in some ways, you could think of various forms of social media as providing people with a giant megaphone for their inner voice, right? It's literally asking you, or it did, what is on your mind right now?
So that's in terms of posting like what's on your mind. But in terms of consuming information, which I think most people on social media seem to be consumers more than creators. I mean, it's remarkable to me how I can, pick up the phone, and I have a specific phone with Instagram and X on it, and those apps are not on any other phones, so that it's segregated from.
Smart.
So if somebody sends me a tweet or sends me an Instagram post I'm not gonna open it. I can't open it on those phones.
Right.
And that's helped a lot.
We should come back to that because that's also modifying your spaces, which is another tool that I think is underutilized. So we should talk about that too.
Well, again, that kind of tool, you have to regulate. Again, you have to be able to measure internally to what extent are you using these mechanisms to cover up subconscious programs. I don't know what Andrew Huberman's background is. I don't know what he's got rolling around in his subconscious. But again, just telling somebody who has a social media addiction because of their subconscious programs to just get 2 phones so that you can be productive on one and do other things on the other, like the feeling has to be quashed somehow. So if it's not the social media vice, it becomes any other number of vices. And so if you find that, again, it's like, I'm all for productivity hacks and tools, and I think those are all good, but you have to ask yourself, like, again, the most beneficial productivity hack you can have, or you can give yourself, is aligning your subconscious mind with the goals that you want in your life. And everything else trickles out of that. If you do that and you find that having 2 phones is just more productive, then cool. But, like, evaluate why you're doing these things rather than just trying all these different tips and tricks to make yourself less addictive. But what if you just weren't, the tendency for addiction just wasn't there to begin with? Again, it's all about root causes and empowering you to go after those root causes. So let's keep going.
Definitely touch on that. What I find is, I'll say, okay, I'm going to take 6 minutes. It's 6 minutes till the hour. Take 6 minutes. This. And what's incredible is how fast 6 minutes seems to go by. That's what's so striking.
It's remarkable, and not always bad. So we often talk about social media like it is a de facto harm to society. There are negative features of social media that are well documented. There are also some, I would argue, redemptive qualities to it. I'll give you one of my personal ones, which is, sometimes, like, to unwind before bed, I'm thinking all day, I want to just watch some ridiculously funny short reels.
Yeah, raccoon videos.
Yeah, I mean, my wife looks over at me and she's like, "What are you laughing at?" And then sometimes I show her and she goes, "Why are you laughing at that?" Right? So, but the algorithm has learned the specific kinds of funny videos that I like, and no, I'm not going to tell you what they are. And it just lightens the load. And so that's a way that I'm using social media very strategically to shift my emotions in a direction I want them to be shifted.
Again, that's different from relaxation is different than addiction. Relaxation is perfectly fine, but again, I'll go solo for this. So it's like, yes, relaxation is the difference between relaxation and addiction is because addiction happens because you're trying to numb something. Relaxation happens because you're trying to, like, reset something. You're trying to reset your mind. You're trying to relax your mind from thinking. It's to make it more productive. But they're often, I think that part of the purpose of my channel is to try and show people, like, kind of unwind those two and, like, untangle those two so that you know whether or not you're relaxing or trying to avoid something. If you're trying to avoid what's in your head, again, And not just, I want to be even more specific than just avoid what's in your head. Because at the end of, for me, it's like reading. I find that for me, when I've been doing a lot of work and I've been preparing for shows and I've been doing a lot of work in the business and I've been doing a lot of my job and doing all this other stuff, that sometimes reading helps just calm my mind from the day-to-day activities. And I'm not using it to suppress what's in my subconscious. I'm just using it to make myself more efficient in the activities I'm doing. Which, technically, I think you can do both. Because I think, there are people who are addicted to caffeine pills or those nicotine pouches who are probably objectively more efficient on them, but they're more efficient because they're blocking out those subconscious programs, which are making them less efficient. So I think that understanding why you're doing something is important, and I would argue that I'm more efficient when I don't have to use. It's like they have to use that to be productive. Like they're chemically altering their brain, the status of their brain, so that they can just get anything done. If I'm having to use nicotine and caffeine and to chemically force my brain into a scenario so that I can override my subconscious programs so that I can then be productive, it's like you're trying to jump over hurdles. And if you remove that, and I'm not even saying that you shouldn't, I don't really have a strong opinion on using nicotine or caffeine, but I think I can confidently say that if Alex Hormozy, I bring him up because I watch a lot of his stuff. I think he's brilliant. If he were to just remove the subconscious programs and use the chemicals to enhance his brain, I think he'd be even more productive because he's using the chemicals to override more than one thing rather than just using it to increase his productivity. He's using it to suppress his negative feelings and increase his his productivity. And I think that he would find that his productivity goes up if the chemicals are only used for one thing rather than two. So, I don't have a problem with the tools necessarily. I don't know if I am educated enough to understand how those tools work, but I do know that people tend to take them for those reasons. And if you want to keep taking them after you clear your subconscious, that's cool. But again, from just an efficiency standpoint, it's more efficient to do work when your subconscious programs are aligned with you than against you. So why not work to align them with you? That's the best advice I can give. And if you are interested in doing that, if I can help show you how to align your subconscious programs with what you want to do, come talk. My chat link is in the description. Come talk with me. Let's work out a plan for you. All right, let's keep going here.
At a certain time. I think when we talk about social media and our emotional lives, the real challenge we face is how to learn how to navigate these new digital environments in ways that serve us rather than serve against us and undermine our goals. We basically got thrown into social media without any rule book.
Yeah, we're the experiment.
We're the experiment. But if you think about it, it's a new environment. We were born into this physical world, and our parents, our caretakers, from the time we're able to understand things, and probably before, they are teaching us, they're socializing us how to navigate this space profitably. They don't just like Lord of the Flies throw us into the world and let us kind of figure it out. Outcomes wouldn't be likely as good as they are for us if we didn't have the kind of instruction that we receive. And we're only now developing that knowledge base to understand, hey, here are the healthy versus harmful versus benign ways of navigating social media. And I'm talking about social media now like it's this unitary environment. Different social media applications, of course, have their own norms and rules of the games. You could think of them as like little different countries. They have their own little microcultures that you want to learn how to navigate. And scientists are really busy trying to understand how they function, but it's tricky. And it's tricky because creators can change how these applications govern by a press of a button, right? You can change the way the algorithm works, and then you've got to start over to some extent.
I've been told that by people in my life that one of the main reasons they get onto their phone in the middle of the night if they happen to wake up is that it allows a very soothing distraction compared to trying to wrestle with the fire hose of thoughts in their head.
Yeah.
And that it's kind of like the way you describe these funny videos that you won't disclose to us. That sounds like
they typically involve pranks.
Again, trying to avoid the fire hose of thoughts in their head, which I think it's not a difficult extrapolation to assume that those are negative. Again, escape. Again, it's like, why do you have those negative thoughts to begin with? Subconscious, and their subconscious can be rewired so that you don't need to do this.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We used to hear that people would have a drink after work to just kind of like take the edge off or something like that. I feel like social media is doing that for a lot of people.
Yeah.
The way you describe it fits with that idea, and that I certainly believe that from everything we know about the circadian health literature, that you want to avoid looking at your phone between the hours of 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. most nights.
Sure.
Nobody's perfect, but that if you wake up in the middle of the night, one of the worst things you can do is get on your phone and start scrolling social media. But I'm guessing people do it because it feels even worse to just sit there with your thoughts in the dark.
It's a shifter, but this is a perfect segue back to you asked me about the tools.
Exactly. It feels even worse to sit. If you don't like sitting with your thoughts. If you just don't like sitting with yourself or your thoughts, again, that's a good indicator that you've got some subconscious issues going on. If you consistently cannot sit with your thoughts just by yourself, if you don't like what's coming up, that's an indicator you got some subconscious issues going on. And that doesn't mean that, if you're grieving over, loss of a loved one or something like that, or a friend, that's different. But if you find that consistently, over months and months, you're ruminating and thinking about the same problems over and over again, yeah, there's probably some subconscious issues going on that you need to address, or something in your environment that's particularly damaging. I often, I told one of my clients this the other day, which was, I can go solo for this. I can address your subconscious as much as possible, but I can't change the environment you're in. And so if you're in a toxic environment, you're with, I don't know, a toxic parent or sibling or boyfriend, girlfriend, if you're around people who are toxic consistently. So fixing your subconscious is important, but it also is important for you to separate yourself. Your brain has to learn space. And part of that is just giving yourself permission to leave those people behind. It's not just about, I can help you make your subconscious strong enough that even being around those negative people may not bother you as much. They narcissists. They might try and mess with you, but you find they don't really have that power anymore. That's possible. But that first requires you to separate from that person so you can look at yourself objectively. And it's also just believing that you're worthy enough to not be mistreated. That's kind of the first step, is like people that get consistently mistreated by people sometimes assume that that's the way it has to be. They just assume that they have to put up with people's poor behavior consistently, and that's just not the case. Nobody has a right to treat you poorly, or nobody has a license to treat you poorly. And so if you find yourself in a scenario like that where people in your environment are treating you poorly and you feel like you're not good enough and you kind of shame yourself, it is important to both get away from those toxic people and to heal your subconscious mind. You have to really do both. And I think that, is it more important to do one first or the other? Not particularly. I find that when you heal your own mind, most clients, they get somewhat motivated to leave that environment because it's no longer a match. Like if I'm being mistreated by my, let's just say, parent, because I've worked with a lot of people who still live at home. If their parent, one of their mom or dad is particularly negative or narcissistic or, I won't say abusive, but, they just kind of absorb a negativity into their life that negativity inevitably causes the subconscious programs of the child. But once I clear those out of the child, most of them end up moving out of their house or wherever they're living with their parent within, I think, maximum like a year. It's just they don't stick around because that mistreatment is no longer aligns with what they think they deserve. And so if this parent is, I don't know, lying or manipulative or shame or guilt trips them, or those techniques might not work as well, but they also don't voluntarily choose to be around it. It's no longer a match for what they think they deserve, because to a certain extent, people who get abused, especially by their parents, we tend to think of our parents as gods, and so we assume there's something wrong with us, and so we assume it's our fault. But once we figure out it's not our fault, that this parent just has their own inner struggles that they're dealing with, and oftentimes we stop. It's just that those interactions are no longer a match for what we think we deserve in our own subconscious. We think we understand inherently that we deserve better than that. And our behavior naturally starts to shift away from that. It becomes less of a conscious, it's a conscious choice to, take the steps and leave, but it feels more like this is just the natural progression of how things should be. Because people's trapped in those abusive relationships, sometimes they often think, well, this is the best it's ever going to be. They think this is how things have to be. But when you change your subconscious, you realize that you still have that thought, this is how things have to be, but now things have to be pointed in a direction that's beneficial to you, rather than taking away from you. People will allow themselves to be put in negative situations for years and years and years. I've seen it many times without ever moving, because they kind of think, well, I have to put up with this. I don't deserve any better, which is sad. And you say, was that victim blaming? Well, not exactly. It's understanding the system. And this is what people have told, this is what clients and myself I've experienced, is they've told me this. They feel like they have to, like, a good example is like divorce. I had one client who was like, my parents' divorce was all my fault and it's my responsibility to fix it. Even though my parents aren't doing very good to me, I feel like I still owe it to them. If I was just a better kid, if I was just doing this, he was inherently trapped by, he was trapping himself. His subconscious programs were trapping himself. His need to try and fix a divorce was trapping himself. And, he's not really a victim. He's a victim in a way, but it's like he is a victim of his own upbringing and his own subconscious programs. Like, that's why I think it's helpful to think of these subconscious programs as like viruses on a computer. A computer is not supposed to run a computer, pick your favorite operating system. A computer is supposed to work. It's supposed to run functionally. It's supposed to have this. But if you get a virus, the virus is not inherently part of the computer. But it integrates into the computer and messes with the computer and makes the computer do things it's not supposed to do. So, again, it's like, you are not your subconscious programs. You might be, your behavior is certainly tilted by them, the real you, the real authentic you, the true you, is like that computer. You just might have a couple viruses on it. But if you remove the viruses from the computer, it doesn't, like, the computer isn't bad because it has viruses. If you remove the viruses, the computer becomes perfectly fine. And so those viruses are those subconscious programs that are pushing on your head. Those viruses are telling you, you're not good enough. You have to tolerate this abuse. You have to tolerate this behavior. You don't deserve any better. You have to fix, the divorce was your fault. You have to fix these things. You have to communicate with your dad so that he understands you should have done better. You need to apologize. Those are all just viruses in your head going around. And so if you remove those viruses, you realize, the computer works just fine. And there's nothing wrong with you. There's really nothing wrong with you. So I think that's the most important thing to remember, is there's nothing wrong with you. Just because a computer doesn't have just because a computer has a couple viruses on it, or multiple viruses on it, doesn't mean that the whole thing is broken. Because if you remove the viruses, the computer's fine. And it runs the way it's supposed to. And I think that thinking of your negative subconscious programs as just viruses is helpful because it separates you out. If you say, I'm sick with a cold, we don't think of, I have a cold. A literal virus, not a computer virus, but a biological virus. And we think of that as, okay, we don't think of ourselves as inherently flawed because we don't think, I'm not good enough because I have a cold. It's like, no, it doesn't make any sense. It's like I'm sick. I have to recover from my cold. It doesn't, I think when you compare it to like being sick, it kind of understands, like, okay, I've got, I don't know, some virus, whatever it is, whatever infection you might have. But it's like, does that mean you're inherently less of a person because you have an infection? But like, if you remove the infection, then it's okay. Then you're good. It's like, okay, and even infections that, but again, maybe this isn't a great analogy because not all infections can be cured, sure. But the viruses that are in your subconscious can be removed, and you don't have to deal with them anymore. That's the brilliant thing, is all the viruses, any infection in your head, infection meaning subconscious programs, all of those all the bad ones can be removed, and good ones can replace them. All right, we'll keep going a little. 9:02. Okay, keep going a little further here.
That you recommend for fighting chatter, and I'm telling you about the ones I use. So there's a second tool that I will use automatically when I detect the chatter brewing, and I call it my 2 a.m. chatter strategy. And I call it my 2 a.m. chatter strategy because seemingly like 4 to 6 weeks, I will go to bed happy and content, and then I'll wake up at 2 a.m. and like it is all going to hell really fast.
What time do you typically go to sleep?
Usually around 11:30.
Interesting. Yeah, this is a common problem for a lot of people, and there's some tools like long exhale breathing and things that clearly work. I long ago made a decision. I refuse to believe any thought that occurs between the hours of 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. I just refuse. I don't believe it. It's as if somebody's lying to me in my head.
Yeah.
And one could argue, well, maybe that's where the truth is coming out because your forebrain is not so good at suppressing these, unconscious thoughts. And sure, all good, but as you point out, they are rarely the kind of thoughts that one can work with, positive or negative.
So the tool that I use actually implicitly activates an idea like the one you are describing. So at 2 a.m. when the chatter strikes, and by the way, you say like, oh, this is common. This is more than common. When I present to audiences and thousands and thousands of people over the years, and I ask, hey, you ever get 2 a.m. chatter? Maybe 2:30 a.m. All the hands go up. This is I don't want to say universal affliction, but it is an incredibly common problem that people struggle with, like the chatter at night. So what I do is I use something called mental time travel into the future. And what I do is I ask myself, I typically use my own name to do it, so I'm blending another distancing tool, distance self-talk. Ethan, how are you going to feel about this tomorrow morning? No matter how bad the chatter ever is at 2 a.m., to your point, when I wake up the next morning and my brain is fully awake and I have access to my prefrontal cortex and I can think constructively about things, it is never as bad that next morning as it is in the middle of the night. We, of course, have learned that over time, because how many mornings have we woken up in our lives? We could do the math. If I was more sophisticated, I'd do it on the fly. I can't. Right? But like many mornings we've experienced this, like chatter at 2 a.m., at 7 a.m., not so bad. So when you jump into this mental time travel machine and you ask yourself,
Yeah, I guess. I mean, part of what I would say to that is like, depends on what the chatter is. You know, again, even like sleep can be used as a way of, people, there's a reason people oversleep. They sleep in till, or they just, whatever they sleep into, they oversleep because they're inherently not trying to think about the things. And yes, sleep provides a buffer from you and your subconscious thoughts. And so if you're experiencing this 2 a.m. chatter he's describing, and he's like, well, I refuse to believe any of the thoughts. It's like, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe that's not the right approach. Well, it's the right approach if you only have cognitive tools to address it. But if you have subconscious tools to address it, maybe the 2 a.m. chatter should indicate to you what's still in your head, because I'm sure not everyone gets this. And so this is why I wanted to cover this topic, was because I think that this 2 a.m. chatter thing he's describing can be, you have to be able to look at it correctly. And what I mean by correctly is the 2 a.m. chatter being caused by my negative subconscious programs, or is it being caused just because my mind is super active today or that day and I'm still processing the events? Like, there's a big difference there. And so I think that the reason I like to cover cognitive tools on this show and on my show with on Inner Game Group on Ryan Fowler's channel is because these cognitive tools can be useful, but I think that some people might feel, if you're going through I've had clients that have gone through traditional therapy, they've gone through a lot of this CBT kind of stuff, and they find that they're given all these cognitive tools to address a subconscious problem, but a subconscious problem requires a subconscious tool to fix. And so I don't, if you're watching this and you're like, well, I do that, I try and tell myself not to believe anything on 2 a.m., or I try and I do this, I try and step back and watch my thoughts, and I'm still struggling. Well, come work with me, because you might find that the root cause of your problems is, like, these solutions are fine for kind of surface level problems that aren't, these tools are useful for problems that aren't involved in your subconscious. But if you're never told that there's a separation between cognitive issues and subconscious issues, then you're using tools that should be used for one type and not the other. So if you are, I think I'll wrap it up here soon. I might cover part 2 next week. But the point is, bottom line, if you're experiencing any of these subconscious issues, if you're experiencing these things, come work with me. We can, that's what hypnosis, that's what I do in hypnosis is specifically designed to target and to remove. And it's basically to empower yourself. Don't be afraid of yourself. You don't need to be afraid of yourself. You don't need to be afraid of your thoughts. Spoiler alert, you are good enough just as you are. You are that. If you're struggling with your subconscious programs, you're just that computer with a couple viruses on it. And we can get rid of those things. And we can permanently get rid of them, so you don't struggle with them again. Yeah, that's the show. Thanks for watching. If you like the content or have a suggestion for more content, leave me a comment or a like. Yeah. But that's all I got. I haven't quite figured out a catchphrase to end these things on yet. But thanks for watching.